Hello, welcome to the fourth micro-learning session prepared for the Spur Change Capacity Building and Knowledge Sharing for Small and Medium Organizations program. This session will focus on quantitative data collection. Quantitative data are data that are quantifiable and are often collected through a survey. Surveys will be the focus of this micro session. The goal of quantitative data collection is often to describe a phenomenon within the entire population. While survey data can be collected from a non-representative sample, a sample that is not representative will not describe the entire population. This is important to consider when you write up your results from your survey and will be covered in this presentation. Also, this presentation will provide an overview of how you can identify the target population for your survey and determine sample size and sampling. Also, this presentation will provide guidelines for developing data collection tools and training data collectors. The first step in designing your survey is to determine who the target population is, which should be outlined in your Performance Measurement Framework, or PMF, that was developed for your project. In the sample PMF provided on this slide, the target population is identified in the column labeled Data Source and is farmers in District X. The project intends to use two surveys to collect data, a post-harvest survey and a farm survey with data collection happening 1 month after planning. At this time, I would encourage you to review the PMF that was developed for your program. Which of your indicators could be measured using a survey, and who would the target population be? There are numerous options for collecting survey data. Some of these include an email survey. Be careful with this option. If you did not collect the email addresses yourself, you will need to ask the party who gave you the addresses for permission to contact potential respondents. It may be possible for you to collect survey data on a smartphone or tablet. Going into details about how to set up a smartphone or tablet survey is beyond the scope of this presentation. However, a link is provided for Open Data Kit, which is a commonly used platform for collecting smartphone or tablet data. Another option would be to send your survey out using an online survey link, using a platform such as SurveyMonkey. A link to SurveyMonkey is provided on the slide. You can also collect paper-based survey data, which will require that you develop a database for data entry. One simple and reasonably easy to learn database platform is called Access, which may be included in your Microsoft Office suite of tools, depending on your subscription. You may also collect interview data using a telephone survey. No matter what method you choose to distribute your survey, consider how you will protect the confidentiality of your informants. Things to think about include, where will your data be stored? Who will have access to the data, and for how long will it be stored? If you are using a server to store your data, think about how secure the server is. No matter how you collect data, please develop protocols to protect the data. If the data is paper-based, it should be stored in a locked cupboard. If the data is electronic, it should be stored on a password-protected computer with only certain people given permission to view the data. Data should always be identified. This means removing identifying information such as names and addresses and replacing these with codes. Also think about what will happen to your data after the study is complete. At the end of the project, who will own the data? For your survey, you will need to determine how many people you will collect data from. This is called sample size. In some situations, you may be able to collect data from everyone in your population. However, it is often the case that survey data is collected from a sample of the population. A comprehensive explanation of how to calculate sample size is beyond the scope of this presentation. However, in order to calculate sample size, you will need to know the total size of your population, what your margin of error will be, and you will need to select a confidence interval. It is highly recommended that you seek assistance from a statistical expert to help you accurately determine sample size. There are numerous online sample size calculators that may be useful to your organization. A link to a sample size calculator provided by UNICEF is included on this slide, which you could use if you are collecting household survey data. Once you have determined your sample size, you will need to sample respondents who will complete your survey. A good way to do this is to determine the number of surveys you would like to collect in each area where you are working, which will depend on your survey design. On this slide, an example of sampling is provided for a project that is working with farmers in 3 districts in Warrap State in South Sudan. Survey data for this project will be collected from 6 villages, which were randomly selected from a list of all the villages located within the 3 districts. For your project, lists of all the villages or districts in the area where you are working can often be obtained from national census data. The 6 randomly selected villages for this sample project are indicated in this chart on the slide. The sample size calculations for this project indicated that we would need to collect data from 120 farmers and that a sample of 20 farmers in each randomly selected village would be identified for a survey. The next task is to determine which farmers in each village will be approached to complete the survey. In order to do this, all the farmers in each village were listed, as illustrated on this slide. For your project, a good way to develop a list of all the individuals in the area where you are working is to work with local leadership who may already have a list, or you can work with them to create a list. From this list, you would then take a random sample, which in the case of this sample project is 20 farmers. There are numerous methods that you can use to generate a random sample. One method is to use a random number book, or you could use the random number feature in Excel. Otherwise, there are numerous online random number generators. A link for one of these is provided on the slide. In this example, there were 45 farmers in the village. We need to select 20 of these farmers. A random number generator provided 20 randomly selected numbers. The farmers on the list who correspond with these randomly generated numbers were selected for a survey. This random selection method ensures that farmers who live close to the center of the village or are easy to locate for other reasons are equally likely to be selected for a survey as are villagers who live in remote or hard to reach locations. Survey data collection tools can be developed from standardized survey questions, or they can be developed specifically for your project, or you can use a combination of standardized questions and unique questions. Standardized survey questions are useful to include in your survey if you are collecting data that reports on standardized indicators, such as those that might be asked in a household survey or a health facility survey. This slide provides 3 links to standardized survey question sets and tools. It is important to note that the results from survey questions that are developed uniquely for your project can be compared from baseline to endline of your project, but would not be comparable to data collected from other similar projects. This is because another project is unlikely to ask exactly the same question using exactly the same methods that you used to develop your unique questions in your survey. The next 4 slides provide tips for developing survey tools. First, when you develop a survey tool, be sure to include demographic questions at the beginning of your survey. This will help you think about how you will disaggregate your data and how you will report on your data. Second, if you are using standardized tools, do not change the order, wording, or number of questions that are used to ask about and measure the indicator. If you change these things, then you will no longer be reporting on the standardized indicator. Third, think about the logic of your survey. The sample questionnaire provided on this slide provides an example of how you might want to think about the logic in your survey. Please take time to review the example provided on this slide and follow the logic of how some question responses would cause the interviewer to skip questions that would not be relevant to the respondent. Where appropriate, include an other response in your response options. Including other as a response option will allow your respondent to respond using an answer that you may not have thought of to include in your survey. However, Think hard about where it is appropriate to include an other response. Including other response options for every question can result in a lot of time-consuming data cleaning during data analysis. One way to avoid too many other responses is to seek local input for potential responses as you develop your survey. Also, train your data collectors to select other only when they are certain that none of the other response options are appropriate. Also be sure that data collectors know that they must always specify what the other response is. Ask only one question at a time. A sample of this is provided on this slide. In the first box, the question is, do you think a man has the right to beat his wife or partner if she goes out without telling him or burns the food? This question is asking two things at the same time. Instead of asking the question in this way, ask the question as it is outlined in the second box, which is to break the question into two components. Finally, always avoid asking too many questions or questions that are irrelevant to your project. It is often tempting to ask questions about everything that is of interest to you, but if you are not going to report on data that you collect, then do not include the questions in your survey. Asking additional questions that you will not report on increases the length of your survey and the cost of collecting and analyzing your data. It is also a matter of respect for your participants who are providing their time to answer your questions. Important considerations for training data and collectors include training your data collectors to appropriately and politely introduce themselves and the project. They also need to know how to identify individuals who are eligible for an interview, as was discussed on slide 7 of this presentation. Make sure your data collectors understand how important it is that they are able to locate a safe and private space to conduct an interview. In some instances, your data collector should be instructed to not ask certain questions, especially if the questions are of a very sensitive nature and if privacy is not available. Be sure to include training on basic technical concepts for your data collectors. For example, if your survey is collecting data related to maternal health, your data collectors may need to know about types of healthcare providers in the country. Train your data collectors to ask survey questions exactly as they were written. If translation of your survey tool is necessary, be sure that the translation accurately reflects the question as it was originally written. Take time to train your data collectors on how to protect the confidentiality of respondents. Data collectors should never let anyone other than their supervisor or the project management team see the data, not even other data collectors. If your data collectors are using electronic equipment, make sure they know how to operate the equipment and keep it safe and in good working order. Also, to be sure that your data collectors have protocols for keeping themselves safe in the community. Out in the field, data collectors may encounter challenging situations and they need to know what to do if one of these situations arise. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. Please take the time to review the summary sheet that accompanies this session.